In just a couple of minutes here, we're going to call Senator Larry Smith to get his take on really the genesis of this. And I'm going to go back, and just before we get to him, this is a very young Dutchie. This is a very young Darren Tradition when they talk about Larry Smith and this idea of expansion. And again, you gotta check this out. Here's a very young Darren Tradition talking about, and this is at halftime. Here's Commissioner Larry Smith talking about, and of course also seen on ESPN, on the Dose, Larry Smith.
Welcome back to McDonald's Halftime. We're glad you're with us. You know, his plan has always been expansion, his passion, the Canadian Football League. Commissioner Larry Smith has seen his share of troubled times with the league, but likes the horizon ahead.
Most of these centers have had the USFL, the World League of American Football, and the World Football League. So we have to sell staying power and consistency, and our owners know that. And so at first there's going to be a bit of skepticism because people are going to say, oh, we've seen this all before. But once people realize that the league itself is 103, 104 years old, and we're not going to go anywhere, and whereas in the past it was the teams in these markets that succeeded and the league failed, it's a reverse situation this time where the league has succeeded and now these teams have to succeed. I think it'll be very interesting, but the fan reaction so far has been positive, and the real catch is when the people see our product. Because in Sacramento we may have only averaged 15,000 people a game, but for the people who saw our product, most of them all came up and said, you know, really difficult for us to go and see an NFL game after watching a CFL game. We took a vote about a year and a half ago to really enshrine our rules, because we feel that the rules are the key to the future of our business. And to change those rules, you'd have to have unanimous support. And as long as we have Canadian teams, there's always going to be one person who puts a hand up and say, no, I don't want to change. So I think we positioned ourselves to protect ourselves. I think that also it's important to understand that our American owners recognize that if they go in with a Me Too product, we're going to get killed because, let's face it, the NFL is very strong. We're selling a unique product. We're creating our own niche. We don't compete against the National Football League. We have to compete against ourselves.
Good morning.
That's what's important.
I would say bonjour, hello, como ça va? Senator Larry Smith, it's Mike Richards calling from rawmikeRichards.com.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Well, I just saw a very young Larry Smith talking about the expansion in 94, 95 and what came out of that. And I will say this, Senator, I see these words describing that time, and it says ill-fated or failed. But to my way of thinking, at that time, it did have a huge infusion of cash that the league badly needed. We eventually get some great teams and players that come out of that, and the validation on the quality of football really, was verified when you had a Baltimore Stallion team that not only put a great Grey Cup together against the BC Lions in BC, but they beat an enormously talented Calgary Stampeder team led by Doug Flutie. They win in Regina. To me, that checks that box. That says to me that it wasn't necessarily, in retrospect, as bad as I think sometimes people make it out, Senator.
Well, it was a critical step in the history of the league to, I'm not going to say save the league, but when I first got involved as commissioner, I recognized that the league was in terrible shape. We had probably half of our franchises that were either failing or we had some questionable leadership in the franchises. And we didn't have any corporate sponsorship. We had a very small television contract. And the truth is, if it wasn't for the initiative of Gordon Craig and Jim Thompson, who were heading up TSN at the time, we would have been really kaput. So when you look at the spectrum and really what took place, in my mind, and I'm not saying this because I was in the slot, but it was troubled times, but a great opportunity, and the expansion did exactly what you said. It gave us some credibility in the States. We were able to sell Doug Flutie's name in the States with David Archer to get ESPN up to a higher level. We were able to get some penetration in the U.S. market, as small as it was. We were able to get a benefit as the exchange of referees. And I'm not sure if a lot of people recognize there's been an exchange with the CFL and the NFL with referees for the last 10 or 15, 20 years because of the our entrance into the United States. And so a lot of good things came out of it. And the only people who got the money from the franchise fees were the Canadian teams. And none of the Americans who joined us got any of that money. So, it was a very interesting time. So,
but as you said, vitally important. So I think, if you're able to go back in the time machine, knowing what you knew now, you would still do it again? Yes.
Yes, but in a different way. The truth of the matter is, when we started that experience, basically, and I'm not going to say I because I don't like saying I too many times, but I had no resources. Basically, one part-time person who was helping me with the expansion, and it was basically a free-for-all. And what we tried to do is set up a strategy at the beginning, and the strategy was quite simple: border point strategy. Our first opportunity was with Fred Anderson in Sacramento, but we wanted to be closer to Canada, and we focused on Portland. And we got involved with Peter Jacobson, the golf pro out of Portland. Peter was well known, and I was lucky enough to go and meet David Stern, who was the commissioner of the NBA at the time, and he helped give us some ideas of how we could possibly look at this opportunity. But he was very helpful. Gary Bettman actually was, I believe, working for David Stern at the time, if I remember correctly. But we had a border point strategy, so Portland, Syracuse, those type of places that were close to the Canadian border would really be opportunities. We realized after getting Fred Anderson involved with Sacramento, and Fred was an outstanding owner, that it was going to be other markets that stepped in also. And, of course, Baltimore with Jim Spiros stepped up, and Jim did a fantastic job of building or resurrecting football in Baltimore after the Colts had left. So when you look at the strategy itself, we didn't necessarily stay on point with the strategy in terms of specific markets, but we did have a plan that said, hey, let's try to get penetration in markets where we can get some critical mass and build something. And that's where we started.
And you certainly did. Senator Smith, it's David Bastel here. It's so good to talk to you this morning, and thank you for joining us. You kind of led to my question where Sacramento was part of it, San Antonio, Memphis, a lot of these cities, not border towns to Canada. And after a while, I know Sacramento was the first city that expanded. You had that one expansion, I believe it was in 1993. After that, did you have other companies or other businesses in the United States coming to you, or was there a little easier sell in 94 when you continued to expand up to 5 teams in 1995? Did they start coming to you instead of you coming to them as far as wanting a team in their city?
Well, you have to understand that at the time we were selling franchises for $3 million US. And so for people in the United States who are entrepreneurs, the entrepreneurs jumped out of the woodwork. Yeah. And basically, if you understand the U.S. mentality, anything is possible in the U.S. Dreams are made in the U.S., and people were coming and visiting with us. And basically, $3 million and $10 million cash flow over and above, we can do that. And great entrepreneurialism, but there was a lot of people that were not necessarily as qualified or as competent or as, credible as we thought. However, with the entry of Fred Anderson, who was with World Football League, Fred was a very, very credible and dignified man. And then we got Spiros involved with Baltimore. And with the success they had, they were averaging 40,000 people a game and put a great team together. It was easier, but the real issue was trying to get the critical mass and trying to get a real formal strategy, because it started to jump out of the woodwork. And the ability of getting border point towns such as Portland, the group in Portland were kicked the tires for quite a period of time, and then we had some people in Syracuse kicking some tires also. But you ended up going to bigger markets, and then you get the Arthur Williams down in Birmingham. And these were billionaires, Arthur Williams, Fred Smith from Federal Express. These were big-time hitters. And even Nick Maletti, it was the Las Vegas franchise turned out to be a disaster, but Nick Maletti and his group out of L.A. Raised over $6 million in 30 minutes in terms of capital,
Wow.
venture capital, to fund that franchise. The problem was they took the $3 million that they paid us, put it in their pockets, and they ran the franchise into the ground with $3 million in about 4 months. So, if you look back at the history, it was well-intentioned, and a lot of good things came out of it. But the fact of the matter is that we had very, very limited resources. So going back to your question, would you do it again? Absolutely. Would you do it again differently? Absolutely, because we have more knowledge this time than last time. But if you look at the CFL now, I think that Randy Ambrosie's really got the right strategy, and this goes back over 20 years. Get yourself into Halifax, into a major market in the East Coast, so you complement and have 10 teams, which gives you a fantastic league.
Senator, you certainly come to success. I would say sometimes my dad being a coach and a great educator, we learn along the way. And when I look at how your life has been, from coming to Bishops and then I think working under and playing for the great Marv Levy. I mean, I would think there are things that you learned in that period of time that you must carry today with you as a senator.
Well, I have to admit to you that I've had 3 people in my life who were mentors. One was Bruce Coulter, who just recently passed away at Bishops. And Bruce was just an outstanding coach, but a great person, and did so much to help young men develop and help me personally in my career to be able to get into the CFL. Marv Levy was just very similar to Bruce in terms of his demeanor. He was very balanced. He was thoughtful. Very intelligent, and just had a great love for our team. I had a business associate who helped me out in business and got me into John Labatt Limited, and was my next door neighbor, Terry McDonald, and I didn't even know it till after the headhunter called me. But people who help you in your life are so important. This is why I always say to players, get out, get involved in the community, and this is, of course, what we did in rebuilding the Alouettes. We got ourselves so heavily entrenched in the community that you help young people develop, and I think this is one of the key factors that helped me in my life, is give back to the community which you received when you were young.
I wanted to talk about something you just brought up when you brought up Randy Ambrosie and expansion, because we do hear talk that there will be a team in Halifax, and there's even some rumors that perhaps Quebec City or something of that nature. And now rewinding it back to the 90s, did you ever consider any expansion in Canada at that time with a Halifax or a New Brunswick or a Quebec City? I know it wasn't as big as a hotbed, especially the Quebec example, just because of what's happened in the CIS in that province. Was there ever any talk, maybe a Saskatoon, a second team in the province of Saskatchewan? Did any of this ever cross the table when you were the commissioner of the league?
Well, you just brought up Saskatoon. Saskatoon was a site that came into focus, not for very long.
Right.
Quebec City, of course, with the success of the Rouge et Or, and I spent time in Quebec City back in 1994. The challenge was you had Patrick Roy and Jacques Tanguay control hockey, amateur hockey, and college football. And they had a great gig going, and in terms of making sure that they were getting 15,000, 16,000 people out to their football games. They didn't want to ever get involved with the CFL because they felt they'd lose control of that market. Quebec City, of course, is a very unique center, but have done a great job in building college football, and so we have to give kudos to the success of the Francophone community. And then it spread, of course, to University of Montreal, University of Sherbrooke, and when you see the quality of young Quebecers playing football, it's very impressive.
Is Rouge et Or, I'm sorry, is that an amateur team? Because I thought they were a professional team.
They're that good.
Well, yeah, if you look at the size of some of those kids playing, and what's so fantastic to see, honestly, is the quality of Canadian kids and the university system throughout Canada. How it's really improved over time. And I know that there's lots of discussion about concussion and injury, and people are skeptical sometimes about football, but it is a great character builder. Of course, education is so critical in terms of protecting players and making sure that you're not jeopardizing your life by playing. But, it's come a long way, and the kids themselves today very proud to see the evolution of the young Canadians in our country.
Because I could have swore Matthew Bertrand, when he was quarterback, I think he was 37. I said, how old? I think his kids are watching this game. I said, how can this be going on? But it is that kind of dominance that we've seen. And as you know very well, Senator, the grassroots football that happens in Quebec, just like it does in Western Canada, whether it be Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, of course, has a great one. So does BC, quite frankly. And it does lend itself to, I think, where we're sitting now. And, as you just mentioned, the Commissioner, Randy Ambrosie, the league, aside from probably some issues, maybe a little concern in Montreal, I don't know how panicky it is. I certainly would be more worried about what's happening in Toronto. But in terms of the rest of the league, the new stadiums that they have built, and I think sometimes the level of play and the attendance, I think, speaking, it's maybe the healthiest it's ever been.
Well, I would say that the CFL goes through cycles. If you remember back in the early 80s, Doug Mitchell got I believe it was a $33 million TV contract over 3 years, which was huge at the time. And with the peak of the 70s, with the expansion of the Olympic Stadium, with the Commonwealth, you had, and of course in Toronto with the Sky Dome. But you had the peak period in that late 70s, early 80s, and then all of a sudden the down period, and that came in just before I took over as commissioner. And being aware of where the league was at, it's always had its ups and downs. And I would have to agree with you. At this time, you're at a high, but at the same time, there's more work to be done. You have to make sure that in Montreal, you're going to get the type of play that's going to generate fan support. The good news for the Alouettes, and it's not good news, is that you have the Canadians that are having some frustrations, and the soccer team, the Impact, that is not necessarily playing at its highest level. That's not a good omen when you have three teams that are struggling in a market that demands excellence. And Toronto, you'd mentioned the difficulties they have. The good news about Toronto is you have very powerful people involved with that franchise who have deep pockets, and I think it's a matter of time. Jim Spiros and Mark Trestman are two excellent individuals, and they will get the players in place. So when you look at the other teams in Saskatchewan to do what it did and build that beautiful stadium, it just shows that the quality of people in that province and the I guess the belief in what they can do to be better. And it's just a fantastic experience. And so yes, the league is at a point, but it has to keep going, because you understand television controls sport. And television in Canada still, I don't believe we're much more than 13 or 14 million television sets in our country. And when you compare it to the size of the American market, it is more than a 10-to-1 difference in terms of size and capacity. Television drives sport, and the key is being able to get that market and grow that market.
Senator Smith, when you look back at your career and being the CFL commissioner for as long as you were, and now being the official leader of the opposition in the Senate, is there anything that, and I'm trying to link up the two because I see some comparisons, but of course I've never been in either one of these positions that you have. Do you see anything that you've taken out of being a commissioner of a league into now, being a senator and being an official opposition leader of the Senate? And what sort of things do you deal with on a day-to-day basis that kind of link you back to your football background and your business background? Because it's quite the resume that you have built up.
Well, when you play on a team and spend so much of your life playing with other individuals, you'll learn a little bit about values, and you'll learn a little bit about teamwork and understanding goals and objectives, and that's been very helpful in my life. I applied for the CFL commissioner's job because I honestly believed at the time that I could do something to help the league. I knew the league was in big trouble, and I said, I'd rather be at the helm of the ship than have somebody else there who may not be as strong or could do what I could do. And that's not an arrogant statement. It was just a belief. And so part of your life is you develop belief systems and you get yourself dedicated to causes. And to me, the CFL was a cause. A little anecdote. I had lunch the first or second day as commissioner with a fellow named Donald Crump, not Trump, Crump. And he was Harold Ballard's accountant. And he was the commissioner before I started. He wasn't commissioner for very long. But he passed on a very interesting comment. He said, Commissioner, he said, I've got a recommendation for you. And I said, what's that, sir? And because I was very thankful that he would spend time with me. He said, don't make any decisions. And I said, I beg your pardon. And he said, don't make any decisions. And I understood the message. There was a subliminal message there. And his message was, don't make any decisions, because every decision you make, you will use social capital. So going in, I knew that any decision that I made, it would be like drinking water out of a glass, which is my social capital. And I also knew that if I could last 5 years as commissioner, it would be a miracle in the context of where the CFL was at. But it was sort of maybe a dedication to the cause, because I had such a great time as a player with my friends who I still have, who were former players, that it was something I wanted to do. And when you look at politics, Canada is such a great country, and getting involved with politics was something I thought about long and hard early in my life. I never really did at the time because I had a family and I had to bring up my family. But at the same time, getting involved with politics, my objective is very simple: help make Canada a better place. There's no personal gain for me in this deal. And being leader of the opposition, it's trying to mobilize people and make sure that people are consistent in their thought process and think things through, because there's a lot of emotion in politics. And but it's a great experience. I'm so proud and honored to have the opportunity to participate.
Well, Senator, it's been fantastic having you on the show this morning, covering many, many topics. But there's the one thing that I have not asked, and I thought, boy, if I ever see Larry Smith, I got to ask him about this one. So when Brad goes on The Bachelor, did you know they were coming to your house?
Well, when Brad went on The Bachelor, it was a very interesting experience, and a great one for Brad, because he was in theater as a young guy, and when they came to the house, they did just sort of take over the house, but it was something that Lisa and I will never forget. And for Brad, it turned out to be a great experience. Unfortunately, he and Bianca didn't stay together, but it was one of those things that I think he learned a lot of life lessons through that deal.
Love it.
That's a pretty diplomatic answer, eh? There you go. That's why you chose that job. Good for you, Senator. Thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure and certainly fun for both myself, all the viewers and the listeners, getting a little inside take on the decisions at the time and the decisions you're currently making. It's been a wonderful morning, and I thank you so much, Larry, for joining us here today.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you.
That is Senator Larry Smith joining us here today on rawmikeRichards.com. And I've always certainly respected literally everything that he has done, because most of it, most people wouldn't do what he has done. I mean, do you want to be commissioner of the CFL? After Donald Crump, and I do remember, he looked exactly like Homer Simpson with glasses. Yeah, you're right. He looked like Homer, and he never spoke, as just verified by Senator Larry Smith. And you want to take over at that time, and then you decide you're going to take the Canadian Football League and go into the United States.
He's being very modest when he says that he wasn't necessarily the one that saved the, I personally think he did.
He did.
I think Larry Smith did save the CFL, and I thought it was a memorable aspect of the CFL's illustrious, history. When you look back at it and you think of it, and I know we've talked about it countless times, so I thought this has to be a guest on our show because of what happened to the league that we all love and how it bettered it, even though there was some hiccups along the way, but what it did at that time, because being a Bomber fan, every single year Cal Murphy would roll up, this franchise is in trouble. The Bombers could be folding. And this money was pumped into this system, and it wasn't just that. There was a Save the Stampeders campaign.
Oh yes,
the Saskatchewan Roughriders were going to fold up tent too.
There were lotteries at times, and there were telethons.
So
it scared the crap out of me back in those days.
There could have been a time where the entire league would have closed shop if something like this did not happen, and the money that was infused into the pockets of CFL teams that badly needed it. And I think this, we talked to a Hall of Fame guest at every level, and no doubt, Hall of Fame life. I mean, you look at that resume from top to bottom.
Well,
just amazing.